Gerald Lucas here with another installment of Ask Gerald, where you get your real estate questions answered. Today's question comes from Isaac, and Isaac writes from Greenbrook, New Jersey. And Isaac writes, we're buying a rental property. Do you think we should do short-term rentals or get a long-term tenant? Well, that's a good question, Isaac. You know, really the best course of action in terms of deciding whether to do short-term rental or get a long-term tenant really depends on your goals, because there are advantages and disadvantages to both short-term and long-term rentals, both for landlords and for short-term and long-term tenants as well. In general, let's talk about the advantages of short-term rentals. You have higher potential income with short-term rental because of the flexibility of pricing. So with peak demand, you can charge more money, particularly in tourist areas and other high demand areas. You can charge more money when demand goes up. And at the same time, you have more flexibility of use with a short-term rental. So if it's not being rented out, you can use it yourself. Now, on the downside, disadvantage of short-term rental, it's much more of a active investment. It's not passive. So it's going to require a lot more time and effort, much more active maintenance, and the operating costs are much higher with short-term rentals than they are with long-term rentals. So your operating cost with a short-term rental can be as high as 30% of the revenue that you generate on a short-term rental, whereas for long-term rentals, on average, your operating costs are going to be more like 8 to 10% of the revenue that you collect. So again, higher maintenance costs with short-term rentals, higher operating costs, and you also have the issue of local short-term rental regulations. So you really want to familiarize yourself with the law and the area where your property is located, particularly looking out for ordinances that may prohibit or limit the use of your property as a short-term rental. So that's another potential downside. Also with short-term rentals, you've got a lot more turnover, a lot more people going in and out of the property, so it's more potential, higher potential risk for theft and for damage and for things of that sort. But, you know, again, you've got a higher potential income with short-term rental than you do with a long-term rental. So let's talk about the advantages of a long-term rental, which in many ways is a different animal. It's more of a passive investment, so it doesn't require as much active maintenance and time. Operating costs are lower, but again, with a long-term rental, your revenue or income ceiling is lower, potentially lower, right? You can't charge more money when demand is higher because normally you're entering a longer-term lease or agreement with a tenant. But your income with a long-term rental is more stable and it is more predictable. On the downside, you've got less flexibility of use with a long-term rental. You know, if you've got a tenant in there, you can't use the property yourself, whereas in a short-term rental, if it's vacant, you can use it, so less flexibility. And again, it's a lower ceiling in terms of your the income that you can produce with a long-term rental. At the same time, you know, the ordinances that govern short-term rentals, that's something that you don't have to deal with a long-term rental, but again, that will vary from market to market. So to answer your question, which one is better, it really depends on your goals, your risk tolerance, etc. So you want to really do your due diligence, figure out what you want, and make the best decision for yourself. So thanks for your question, Isaac. For more real estate tips and information, visit my blog at geraldlucas.com. I'm Gerald Lucas, and I'll see you again soon.